All right, good morning, everyone. My name's Hugh Fletcher, and today I'm going to be talking to you about 4 key trends shaping future commerce. Now, before the break, we heard from Malcolm in a great speech, and from Mike as well, about the businesses changing and causing some of the trends that we're going to talk about. We also looked at some of the consumer behavior and some of the data and what that's telling us. So now what I want to do is pull on Salmon's extensive global e-commerce experience to talk to you about some of the trends which we have the opinion will change the landscape of e-commerce in the near future. And the trends I'll be talking to you about today are zero UI, zero user interface, interface imperialism, programmatic commerce, and proactive peak formation. So let's start by thinking about what the future of e-commerce will look like, or more to the point, what it won't look like. Let's start by talking about zero UI. So since the dawn of the internet in the early 90s, our primary access into the World Wide Web has been via a screen. When you think of e-commerce, you think about websites and mobile sites, you think about product lister pages and product display pages, and you think about baskets and you think about checkouts. And more recently, that traditional view of e-commerce has been challenged by the rise of things like s-commerce, social commerce. But even that reverts back to a screen to turn interest into purchase. So perhaps the most visible change we're going to see in the next few years is the rise in the phenomenon of zero UI. That is the gradual decline of the screen as our primary access into the internet, as our primary way of buying and selling online. Now, we as agencies and as brands have become experts in communicating brand values and selling our products through screens. We've become experts in using things like imagery and colors and navigations and journeys to communicate those brand values. And we've become experts not only in just designing those experiences, but also in constantly improving them through optimization and things like MVT. So what's going to happen when the screen is no more, or when the screen is less important? What's going to happen when the interface is voice? Or what if it's gesture? What happens if it's thoughts? Or what happens if there is no interface at all and the products are ordering themselves? Well, this is the world of zero UI. Now, does that all sound a little bit like pie in the sky? Because it absolutely shouldn't. We've already talked about Amazon Echo. And of course, there's also Google Home. Now, these are the first mass market iterations of zero UI devices. And we've all become accustomed to the voice interface through things like Siri, although not all of us actually like it. And not only is this a huge change in the user interface, but it's also a massive opportunity, and an opportunity that the tech giants have jumped on. At Salmon, we have a saying, which is he who owns the interface owns the customer. He who owns the customer owns the data, and he who owns the data owns the future. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about interface imperialism, my second trend. But whatever you think the motives of the tech giants are, some of the work they are doing around this space is absolutely incredible. So if you get a chance, check out Google's Project Soli and Google's Project Jacquard to see what zero UI might look like in the future. And all of these advances are moving us towards a world of omni UI, where a customer will move seamlessly from one UI to the next, be that voice, screen, gesture. But what does all this mean for you and for your businesses? Well, most of us here are probably planning our e-commerce futures with screens in mind. But over time, we see the importance of screen reducing. And we see the importance of zero UI increasing. We think that screens will be used when zero UI reaches the limits of its capability. In other words, it will be called a fallback UI. You'll also need to think about your zero UI corporate identity. So I talked earlier on about how we're experts in communicating brand values through screens. But how are we going to communicate brand values through things like gesture? Through things like voice? What about thoughts? So we need to think about things like branded lexicons and branded gestures, maybe even branded thoughts. And how are we going to inspire our customers? So at the moment, we use imagery and search and advertising to entice and encourage our customers to purchase products. But through Zero UI, how's that going to work? How's that going to work when there's no screen? Well, we think data is going to become much more important. Data around personal preferences, personality, and also third party. And this data will be used to supply a customer with the right recommendation at the right time through a Zero UI device. Now, that data will need to be objective. It will need to cross brand boundaries. And it will also need to deliver a 3D vision of a customer. Now, at Salmon, we call this democratized data e-commerce, where we get clever with big and objective data. And this is what blockchain and Bitcoin are trying to achieve. They're trying to establish an objective, unmodifiable, and public layer, which in turn will feed Zero UI devices, and that in turn will feed customers. And that for brands and organizations has some pretty big implications. So we don't think we'll be talking about search engine optimization in the future. We think we'll be talking about ZEO, Zero UI Engine Optimization. So what do you need to think about? You need to think about what your online sales will look like in the future without a website or without a mobile site. You need to think about what your Zero UI corporate identity will be. You need to think about how you're going to operate in an omni-UI world. And you need to think about how you're going to operate in this new data landscape. And what happens if you don't want to think about this and you don't want to invest in this? Well, it's simple. If we leave these developments to the tech giants, it is them and not you that will rule the future of e-commerce, and it is them and not you that will rule the future of Zero UI. Which moves me nicely on to my second trend, what we call interface imperialism. So what is this? This is the consolidation of services, products, and brands under one ecosystem managed by one company. Now, we've already talked about these guys a lot today, but perhaps the best example of interface imperialism in the West is Amazon. As we all know, this is an organization that started off by selling books and now tries to sell everything from A to Z. We talked about their ecosystem. We talked about how they're investing in hardware through Amazon Echo. And we talked about how they're moving into new verticals. So a great example of interface imperialism, trying to control the customer and keep them within their ecosystem. But of course, it's not just Amazon doing this. It's Facebook, it's Google, it's Apple. Each of these organizations seeks to rule the world by giving its customers all the services and products they need under one roof. And why do they do this? Well, it's simple. He who owns the interface owns the customer. He who owns the customer owns the data, and he who owns the data owns the future. Now, another great example of interface imperialism is WeChat over in China, the king of super apps, hoovering up products and brands and giving its customers everything they need under one single stop for e-commerce and for their social lives. But where does all this interface imperialism leave brands? What are brands going to do to counteract this? Well, Forrester recently wrote a report about brands borrowing moments. They talked about how brands can work in China working alongside these apps. They said that smart marketers borrow mobile moments from popular apps. Now just think about this for a minute. Brands borrowing moments. Brands who spent decades building up their brand equity are now forced to borrow moments from apps that didn't exist 2 or 3 years ago. What an incredible fall from grace for brands. And when we talk to organizations about this, some of them challenge us back. They say, okay, yeah, we understand there's a bit of a risk, but people are still buying our stuff, right? And that's important. We say, well, yeah, okay, but we like to challenge back. So how do brands add value when brands no longer own the experience? How do brands add value when they no longer own the data? And how do brands add value when they no longer build the relationship? Now, of course, there are some examples of people doing a great job of fighting back against the interface imperialists. Nespresso is one of my favorite examples. They've invested in their product. They've invested in their connected hardware. They've invested in their online ecosystem, and they've invested in their online community. There are other organizations, people like Net-a-Porter, encouraging customers to come straight to them by offering them added value through things like fantastic editorial content. But the fact is that your brand needs a robust e-commerce strategy, and it needs it now. So Martin Sorrell, head of WPP, the company that owns Salmon, says that one of the questions he gets asked the most by clients and prospective clients is Amazon a friend or foe? And he says this is one of the most difficult questions to get an answer to. So I'm going to go out on a limb today. I'm going to say what I think. And I won't be looking at the lady from Amazon when I say this. And she's very conveniently sitting right in the front row. So Amazon is, in my opinion, a friend in the short term and a foe in the long term. Desperately trying not to look down. This is a company that will help you establish your e-commerce operation, but will potentially mine your data and will potentially steal your customers. We can talk afterwards. So our advice, do not mortgage your brand and the decades of brand equity building against a quick e-commerce solution. Create a compelling online e-commerce experience which is specific to your brand and mix together the holy grail of product, experience, and service. So now I'll move on to my third trend, programmatic commerce. For those of you who were here last year, you'll have heard our CEO, Neil Stewart, talk about this. So what is it? This is the phenomenon of connected devices making purchase decisions on behalf of consenting consumers and businesses based on pre-programmed parameters and learned preferences. What the hell does that mean? So let's do that in English. Machines which will automatically reorder and replenish based on a user's consumption data to ensure a customer never runs out of their product. Now, all this sounds a little bit fantastical and futuristic. It's important to think about this in terms of the sub-trends which are pushing us towards this programmatic commerce future. Now, I've mentioned one already, Zero UI, and I'd now like to touch on two others which I think are moving us towards this programmatic future. What they're also doing is shifting consumer behavior. So the first trend is around subscription. I think we've already mentioned Unilever's $1 billion purchase of Dollar Shave Club. So why is this so interesting to everyone? Why is this one of the biggest pieces of news in 2016? Well, because it takes a very traditional FMCG and puts them in line with an organization which has a direct-to-consumer route to market, a subscription route to market. And of course, there's a huge amount of innovation in the razor space when it comes to subscription. So Cornerstone, Gillette, and of course, Dollar Shave Club. And then we have other examples, Birchbox, Graze, and my favorite, Bjorn Borg underwear. And what these trends are doing is pushing customers to be happier with having ongoing relationships with brands and also with sharing their data and letting purchases take care of themselves. So the next sub-trend which is pushing us towards this programmatic future is semi-automated just-in-time replenishment. What do I mean by that? Well, quite simply, I mean Amazon Dash. And why are these little plastic buttons so important? Well, probably for 4 reasons. The first one is that it changes the interface. So I talked earlier on about Zero UI and how the screen will become less important. And this is an example. Here you can order your product without actually ever having to go to the screen, just one press of a button. It also gets customers used to just-in-time replenishment, and not only just-in-time replenishment, but also small volume replenishment. So there's no waiting for that big purchase of all your items coming in one go. Now you can have your product refulfilled when you need it, one by one. And also, what it does is lock customers into a relationship with brands. So if I need razor blades and I have a Gillette Amazon Dash button in my bathroom, chances are I'm going to press that button. I'm not going to go online and search for competitors. I'm locked into a relationship with Gillette. So we think these sub-trends are changing customer behavior. Customers are happier to enter into ongoing relationships with brands. They're happier to let purchases take care of themselves, and they are happier to share their data. And all of this leads us towards the world of programmatic commerce. So how about a few examples to bring that to life? Well, we already have coffee machines which are connected, which order coffee capsules as and when you run out. And we know that the white goods manufacturers are investing in reservoir technology to make sure that you never run out of fabric conditioner or dishwasher tabs, and they get refulfilled as and when you need them. And what about a future where we have a connected wine rack which knows when we're about to run out of our favorite bottle of wine? So we never have that desperate situation on a Friday night when we get home, realize there's nothing in the rack, and we have to run to the offie and buy a horrible bottle of Plonk. This is the future. So what do you need to know about this programmatic commerce future? Well, you need to know that customers are ready. In some research ran by Salmon last year, we found that 57% of people would be ready for programmatic commerce in the next 2 years, and that 13% of people would be ready now. And we asked them what they'd be happy to enter into programmatic commerce relationships to buy. And they said household supplies, they said food and drink, and they said beauty, healthcare, and personal. We also think that programmatic commerce has the ability to change loyalty. So while your initial decision about a brand or a product may be based around that brand or product, your long-term relationship, your long-term loyalty will be based on the service that you receive. And this links back into this concept of lock-in and lock-out. Programmatic commerce relationships mean that a customer, through ease and convenience, will more likely stay with a brand and less likely to move, which is great if you're locked in and not so good if you're one of the competitors that's locked out, because getting hold of a customer is going to become increasingly more challenging. So what does all this mean for you? What's our advice? Study your products and your consumer behavior and try to work out if any of your products are right for programmatic commerce. You then need to think about how you would replenish your products. Do you need to be investing in hardware? We've talked a lot today about partnerships as well. Do you need to invest in partnerships? And understand what your competitors' plans are. We've talked about this concept of lock-in and lock-out. So make sure you're locking your customers in and not being locked out. But think not just about your customers of today, think about your customers of tomorrow. Another trend we talk a lot about at Salmon is a trend of aggressive horizontality. Organizations moving into new verticals to expand their business. So you need to think about the competitors that could potentially come into your sector and start to lock in your customers to them. So finally, my fourth trend, what we call proactive peak formation. This is the trend of retailers creating their own peaks for the benefit of their organization, but also at the right time and for the benefit of their customers. Now, perhaps the best example of this is Singles Day in China. So this is each year on the 11th of November in China, originally in celebration of being single, but pounced upon by Alibaba as an online shopping day. And this year it accounted for $17.8 billion of online revenue. Now, obviously, in the West, we have Black Friday, $1.23 billion revenue in the UK and $3 billion of revenue in the US. And again, mostly pushed by people like Amazon. And my favorite, I'm on your side this time, Amazon Prime Day. So, July this year, Amazon launched its Amazon Prime Day, apropos of absolutely nothing, and it was, according to Amazon, its biggest ever sales day. And not only are we noticing that retailers are starting to create their own peaks, but we're also noticing they're starting to change what those peaks look like on a regular basis. So you think about Black Friday, it started off as Black Friday. It then became Black Friday and Cyber Monday. It then became what Salmon coined as Black 5 Day. Or again, if you're Amazon, it started on Monday the 14th of November and ended on the 27th of November and was then very quickly followed up by Cyber Deals Week. So what we're seeing is that actually the extension of that period is getting greater and greater. Now these peaks work as well because they target the customer when the customer wants to engage. Our data shows that customers shop with intent on Black Friday. They browse quicker and they convert quicker. And not only that, we see that they start to have different behaviors, things like self-gifting. So while we like to imagine that Black Friday is all about people buying gifts for their loved ones and their families, in reality what they're also doing is buying themselves a little treat. So why am I telling you all this? Well, all of these peaks are recent inventions which have either been created by or exploited by some very canny retailers. They shun some of those traditional peaks like the Boxing Day sales and January sales. And they create new shopping opportunities which are right for the organization, but also right for the customer. So if Amazon can do this with Black Friday and Amazon Prime Day, and if Alibaba can do this with Singles Day, then the question is, can you do this? Can you do this with your customers? Can you create a peak of your own, which is right for your organization and right for your customers? Do you have the size, the scale, and the logistics to be able to do this? And if you don't, Could you maybe collude with some other people in your industry to create a peak which is right for all of your customers and all of your organizations? So those are the 4 key trends which Salmon thinks are shaping future commerce. Zero UI, interface imperialism, programmatic commerce, and proactive peak formation. But before I conclude, it's important to say that in order to take advantage of these trends, in order to prepare yourself for some of these trends, you need to think about change. And we all know we're not that great at change. So you need to address your people and processes. Have you got the right people? Have you got the right processes in place? And you also need to think about your technology. Is your technology stack right? Do you have the right technology partners to get yourself ready for the future where these trends are actually hitting? So, Zero UI, it's here. What are you going to do in a future where the screen is less important? Interface imperialism, it's here. What are you going to do to look after your customers and make sure the interface imperialists do not take them? Programmatic commerce is the future. What are you going to do to make sure that you lock in and don't get locked out? And finally, proactive peak formation. What are you going to do to create peaks of your own that are right for your organization, but also for your customers? At Salmon, we believe that our clients cannot plan for their e-commerce future without us painting a vision of what that future looks like. And that's why at Salmon, we shape future commerce. Thank you.